Haramai to celebrate the University of Canterbury's 150th anniversary. The Department of History is welcoming back and honouring a diversity of our graduates from across the decades. Ko Katie Pickles tōku ingoa, and I'm going to ask our guests about their memories of their time when they were here as a student, discuss their life since graduating, and how history has proved useful, and seek advice for those studying history today and into the future. Our guest today is Honourable Dr Megan Woods. Megan has been a Member of Parliament for Wigram since 2011. She's currently the Minister of Housing, Minister for Infrastructure, Minister of Energy and Resources, Minister for Building and Construction, as well as the Associate Minister Finance. Phew. Megan has also held ministerial portfolios for Greater Christchurch Regeneration and Research, Science and Innovation. Prior to becoming a Member of Parliament, Megan worked as a business manager at Plant and Food Research. Megan, welcome back to History. It's great to have you here with us.
It's wonderful to be back.
Megan, you were here for a good decade as a student and then as a tutor and doing some lecturing for us. So your association with the department is very rich and a long one. And when we were getting ready for this, my colleague Peter Field found your old picture from, this would have been up on the directory here. It's got the old room 208, and of course you haven't changed much at all.
My hair colour.
Yeah, it's quite lovely there, just looking, yeah. So you started here in 1992. What are some of your memories as a student?
Yeah, well, 1992, it was, of course, the year after the mother of all budgets. I think it was the first year of full fees at university with means-tested student allowances. So it was quite a volatile time. There was a lot of change happening in New Zealand. There was pretty routine protests on campus around student fees. And you know, stormings of the registries and visiting ministers of education didn't always have the easiest ride either. But it was kind of, yeah, there was a lot happening kind of in society.
Yes, it was that you were the sort of the first generation when you had to pay fees. There was just the whole tertiary terrain changed, didn't it?
And student loans. I remember lines, because no one had cell phones, of course, and there used to be lines on the day that student loan drawdowns would become available all through the student union building. People waiting to ring up and draw down their next instalment of their student loan. So yeah, it's hard to imagine all that now.
Yeah, but it really signalled in. It was the beginning of that new terrain of user pays education.
That's
very
right.
much so, from a real change in so many ways. And so you were in the registry and locking Lockwood Smith, the Minister of Education, into room. So yeah, there were protests, but they weren't really very successful. And you were part of, I think, the debating club as well.
That's right. I debated at school, and I was a member of the University of Canterbury Debating Society, and went on lots of very enjoyable Easter and winter tournament trips. And a number of people were still my friends from those days. Actually, one of my colleagues is as well, Ginny Anderson, who's now the MP for Hutt South and the Minister of Police. She was a friend from the University of Canterbury Debating Society.
Yeah, unsurprising in some ways, because those skills of debating are really going to take you to the debating chamber, aren't they? They're going to transfer directly into there.
Yeah, there's a few people that have had a background in university or schools debating that are in there now. And I think so. It's probably people who like to argue, Katie.
Yeah, that's what it is. Critical argument. Taking some constructive.
Yes.
Oh, no, that's great. And you took history, obviously, as an undergraduate, and then for a master's, and then for a honours, and on to PhD, and sort of on a variety of areas. So when you started, you were doing the more sort of European courses that people often trot into.
Yeah, so I've done, like everyone else, done European history at school. That we've done a couple of, quick little units in 6th and 7th form on New Zealand history. 1990 was, of course, the 150th anniversary of the treaty.
Yes.
But it was very much the emphasis had been on Tudor and Stuart Britain.
Yes, and so went along and did those and continued, and then sort of discovered with Te Māori and Parsonson, Te Māori Tau, the more local history.
Yeah, and I just found it captivating. It was a history of the South Island of Te Waiponamu, and it was like understanding kind of my world, the place where I lived, and I just absolutely captivated by it, and that kind of led me down a path of basically all New Zealand with a little smattering of Australian history thrown in there as well.
Yes, yes, that turned into your specialisation in New Zealand history as you continued. And so when you were on campus, these were the times before coffee machines.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still drink black tea to this day because I learned not to trust the milk in the calves that have been sitting out all day. So yeah, black tea was a necessity and it's still with me.
That's right. They used to just put the big jugs of milk out, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah. My one was always, if there was a cup around in a tea room, you always made sure you washed it first. We might get a cockroach. That was the student union building. But so yeah, all of these sort of parts that we remember and that come back. And when you were in the history study rooms, of course, you were surrounded by New Zealand parliamentary debates.
That's right, and the appendices to the journals and all those kind of newspapers that the dust literally flew out of some of the volumes when you opened them up. It was wonderful, that room. That was kind of where we went as honours students, where we kind of, that was our base. And they were surrounded by all those parliamentary debates.
Yes, I think that part of the past sort of captured you. You were sort of captured by it and infused, and now you are in those being recorded in Hansard and part of that history.
Yeah, and sometimes when I'm giving speeches, particularly in opposition where you have to kind of fill in time sometimes, that you are conscious, oh my God, someday someone might come back and read this in the Hansard.
Yep, that's our traditional source, isn't it? So
right.
It's still quite fantastic because they will show you that diversity of the past, that if ever anyone thinks there was one opinion on anything, you go back and you see, no, that was actually opposed right back then. Someone thought that was not a good idea. It's yeah, that's what history shows us, isn't it? That whole complexity, and debate, contesting, those events. No, so that was you, and yes, you were here, and you carried on to do your masters on a topic about the First World War and women, and had the pleasure of supervising that. I'd turned back up by then, and I think you even came to my job interview. So, no.
And it was so amazing, kind of like we had some amazing people in the history department at Canterbury, but in that kind of late 90s, I think, well, what was it, 97? 96?
96, started.
And someone being employed to teach feminist and women's history, it was amazing, kind of, and to have that kind of real focus, and
yes,
to have someone who was coming home to do that was pretty cool as well.
Yeah, it was sort of on the hill. It was all thanks to Kate Shepherd, really, and sort of on the heels of suffrage. I think it was all that agitation and that heady time of it. And and we had Philippa Main Smith, and like we were saying, Jeff Rice and Graham Dunstall teaching the Labour history, Philippa more on the political, and Parsonson teaching Māori past, David McIntyre on the whole Commonwealth politics. So we had a whole specialised.
And Lynn Richards with his sports history as well.
Yes, definitely. That's So we had, it was there was lots going on, and so you learned all of that, and you have such a strong training in New Zealand history, and became a researcher and a scholar in that area, and it never really leaves you. I remember you once saying to me about the Hotel California. So it's great to be welcoming you back once again to the building. You can never really leave, and all of that training and expertise. So yes, so you did the masters, and that was the First World War women, and then your PhD is fascinating because in a way it's a precursor, isn't it, of what's to come for you and today. So tell us a little bit about your PhD.
So it was on Māori urbanisation, and it was looking at it in gendered ways, and a lot of it was around housing, it was around apprenticeships, it was around trade training. And Katie, you told me at the time that PhDs always become autobiographical, and I never believed you. Now when I'm thinking about policies to do with Māori housing and trade training, I think maybe you were right and I was wrong. They are autobiographical. also started out, you might remember, I was looking at all the building consents that were issued in Hornby up at National Archives. We didn't continue down that path, but again, it's amazing how full circle you come on some of this stuff.
Yeah. Your particular Turanga Waiwai, like in Wigram and the electric yet, including Hornby, and yes, you've got that really lovely historical knowledge of your area, as well as bringing it right up to the present and taking it into the future, which is good historical knowledge, isn't it? So if we're thinking about your life since graduating, and you could have gone on to an academic career, you could have applied for jobs and got them all around the world, but we think we have choice in life often, don't we? And more often it's about constraint. And at the time, you needed to be in Christchurch, living here.
And life intervenes.
Yes.
So kind of that kind of ability to move around wasn't really there at that point in my life. So, but it doesn't mean that history doesn't stay important for you as you go through.
Yes. Yeah, so you needed to be here, and for family reasons, and you got your first job was in tech commercialization.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I continued doing till I went into Parliament. And I often say to people, it's what anyone with a PhD in New Zealand history does. They go and work in technology commercialization. But it really was about taking those kind of skills of critical and analytical thought, about processing complex and sometimes contradictory information and communicating it in a way that's understandable. And that's really what sifting through archives is sometimes about, and trying to make sense of the past, of kind of reconciling and bringing really complex ideas and distilling them down into something that is understood by other people.
Yes, so it's very much a case where the skills that you had got through all your years of history training enabled you to go straight into tech commercialization, to be snapped up there.
And I think it took some employers who could see that link of the skills, but I think there's a lot of them out there. I mean, years ago, that Bob Jones used to always say that he'd hire history and classics graduates over people with commerce degrees because of those skills of kind of analytical thought and critical thought that they can bring to bear on things.
Yes, yeah, no, very much so, but it's not necessarily what people instantly think of for a historian, but yeah, for you it was absolutely the pathway, and you found those jobs, and very much with those skills that you learned as a historian. And at the same time, you were sort of continuing on with your debating and your critical thinking, and you were involved in campaigning skills.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Sydenham electorate, which became the Wigram electorate, Jim Anderson's seat, and I was a member of kind of his campaign teams from, I think, 99 was the first election I got really involved in, and worked quite hard on. It was one of those things that I remember in 1984 looking out our window and seeing Jim do street corner meetings when he was coming down as the new candidate to stand in the Sydenham electorate, and it was he was someone who was so passionate for his local area and really stood up for people. It was something I greatly respected and got involved in his campaigns, and he was a really important mentor to me.
Yes, no, definitely, and drawing upon all those skills that you had and extending them, and so that was going on at the same time as you're working in your tech commercialization. So thinking about how history has proved useful to you. Well, we were just saying before about knowing about the past in the history of housing in particular, like in a very applied way. History's been useful.
Very much. And kind of the policy processes, like, I mean, you know more than most people, Katie, what my PhD is about, but having to kind of like have a knowledge of what that housing policy had been over a long period of time, and kind of the different, having gone through the archives of people like Peter Fraser and some of our politicians in the immediate post-war period, and them putting together how they were going to get New Zealand out of a housing crisis, has been really, really critical. One of the places he went to, first of all, was how do we get the workforce to do it? How do we create that workforce and Māori migration and Māori trades training was such an important part of that. So just thinking about the different processes that have been gone through, and there's often not that much that's changed alarmingly when you come to look at what your policy options are.
Yes, yeah. So having that knowledge, it's really important. It's like your applied historians skills and vision that you have there, as well as the skills with which you bring to other areas. It's fascinating. So when we're thinking about history in schools, like we're saying, do you think history should be compulsory?
Yeah, and I mean, I was really being a huge advocate of our policy to bring in the teaching of New Zealand history in schools. I think that it's absolutely critical that people do understand our history and our past. That I think that in some ways that the way the world's moving, it's moving into such a post-truth world in so many ways, and actually having that understanding about who we are as a country, where we've come from, how we've got here, how the different groups of New Zealanders have come together to create the communities that we have today, and to have some understanding and not be scared of that difference. And it's our history that teaches us that. And I think that's so important if we're going to have a good society where people genuinely care and respect for one another.
Yes. In fact, to not know about history is dangerous, isn't it? It can be very dangerous. It's very important we know about history. And like when you were talking too, because there is so much disinformation around. And I think you were saying a bit early on in our conversation too about the sort of the discordant world we live in of change. And that's where history is more vital than ever to learn about.
One of the things for me as a politician, having a really good understanding of the treaty has been absolutely critical, and that's what I learned in the History Department of Canterbury. I did Regan's honours course, so I still tell him today that if I misunderstand the treaty, it's his fault. He's the one that taught it to me. But understanding how Article 1 interacts with Article 2, but then also those Article 3 rights around kind of health outcomes and housing outcomes, and how and what citizenship means. And I think that's something that history forces you to think about.
Yes, that's really vital, and it forces us to think about lots of things. And one might wonder, because your background was in the humanities, and you spent a decade mastering and becoming a doctor of history and in teaching and so forth, that then it's quite fascinating how you went into the tech commercialization straight out of that. And we've seen you say how your skills transferred. But what do you think there is a relationship? What do you think it is between arts and sciences? Because you really have been working with those.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that when we have either our sciences or our humanities flourishing, it's when they connect with each other, and that we do see those connections between them. And I mean, back into antiquity, that you didn't really separate them. That was kind of what critical thought was, people that could kind of move between those worlds, and they didn't have this kind of huge separation of them. But I mean, if you think about the technology institutions around the world that we place as kind of the premium, places like MIT, they employ Noam Chomsky. Kind of one of our most radical thinkers. It's kind of, and he's not necessarily someone you'd associate with the sciences and with technology. So they need to inform each other, and I think each is stronger when they do.
Yes, yeah. So that idea of STEAM, not
Absolutely.
STEM. Got to keep the arts in it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, it's really excellent. So if we're thinking of sort of some advice for those studying history today and into the future, have you got anything, any suggestions?
I think history is a fantastic path for curious people to go down. It's one of those things when you have that curiosity about your world. Looking into the past is a great place. You get to go and read people's diaries and letters, and it's okay, but it is. You can exercise all of that nosiness. But I think it is actually about following your passion and your interest, and I think that's one of the things that I was so fortunate with some fantastic people in the history department, yourself included, Katie, that just really encouraged people to really follow your interests and what you were fascinated about. And I think that's one of the critical things when you're thinking about the kinds of history you want to study. And and also that it's one of those subjects where it is ordinary people that are the most interesting.
Yes.
It is where you get to look at the lives of the change that ordinary, everyday people can make and what they can do either individually or more often collectively.
Yes, and there's so many areas in history that we don't know about it. There's always something new to look at and examine, and there's just so room for everyone. I always think, and yeah, there's just so much you can do. And it's fascinating how we're all different. People choose different topics and they get really passionate and enthusiastic about their areas, and it's just so good we're all different that way. It's always intriguing. So there's not a, I guess what you say is there's not a correct way to go or a number of courses. It's more about following your passions is what you're saying there, isn't it? And yeah, it's good for where can history take you? Well, we can see where it has been taking you, and into your career in Parliament, and as a representative of the people. And what do you enjoy most about your job?
I think one of the things I enjoy is that every day is different. I think that is a luxury to have in life, and not everyone gets to have that. There's so much variety, and the reason why it's different is I meet so many interesting people, whether it's in my electorate office meeting my constituents, talking about what's happening in their lives, or travelling the world, meeting other people who are thinking about all these things. But just constantly meeting different people is an absolute privilege.
Yes, no, it would be, and it's such a
change as well is the other privilege.
Yes, yeah. So on one hand, it's really good to meet people and have be part of society, and you'd have a really good gauge of what's going on, and where you can. Your second favorite aspect of the job, make a difference, make a change, really have some impact. It's a popular word these days, isn't it? But or remedy is the other one. Yeah, like. And because you've got your constituents, so you're dealing with individuals, like you say, and meeting people who often have problems, big problems, and very difficult. I mean, what you do, it's very stressful. I'm sure a lot of the time, but you can make a difference there. You can see that, and then on the other hand, with your more ministerial roles, that's just me sort of imagining, but you must be able to see sort of policy change and broader shifts through law changes that are then going to enable progress.
Absolutely, and it's kind of and that's where the kind of having that ability to kind of analyse information and critical thought that history gives you is so important when you're kind of going through looking at what those policies are, and kind of understanding that the way things are doesn't mean they have to stay that way. That the status quo is only ever the status quo for a period of time. When you look over a long arc of history, things can and do change. And often it's individuals and groups that force that change. You don't have to accept that things have to be that way. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear the dog barking.
The dog agrees.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The dog is agreeing that you can make and knowing history gives you that sense of a dynamic world, doesn't it? Yeah, but also it gives warnings, doesn't it? Where history warns us, and about knowing the past and all of those sort of cliches of not letting the past repeat itself, the bad aspects and so forth. But what are some of the most challenging parts of your job? Because it's definitely a challenging job, I would imagine.
Yeah, sometimes it is slow changes to come about. And I think one of the things that it's not amusing because it's not funny, but as I said, going through the archives of some of the ministers in the first Labour government for my PhD thesis, them all complaining about how siloed government departments were and how government needed to be brought together. I could write those same things today in the sixth Labour government. It's kind of, so that is really challenging, and I think probably people find that in all aspects of life just sometimes things get compartmentalised and it's hard to bring things together in a way that would make the most difference. I think that's probably one of the things I find most challenging. I also find disinformation really challenging as well.
Yes, it's definitely of the times, isn't it? Massive, absolutely massive disinformation, and just for everybody working out what's true, what's fake. And I mean that's
that heavy dose of Foucault and Derrida was kind of useful around unpacking the truth.
It's all your skills that we teach, isn't it? And as historians, interrogating all of this. It does equip us really for the modern world. History equips for the present, and it also gives hope and helps to change for the future in some jobs, and that absolutely that's your job that you're doing there, isn't it? So the sort of people who politics suits, we're saying it very much suits those with a historical imagination and those with skills that have come from history.
Yeah. And of course, Michael Cullen, he was a historian. I had a degree from the University of Canterbury as well.
That's right, yes.
It's not unprecedented.
Yeah, it's not unprecedented. And a lot of people go into public service. It might not be directly in Parliament, but in public service. And there seems amongst those who do a history degree very much a sense of service and justice. Often there's a sense of sort of a just and improvement, a sort of it's the heart of the humanities. And as Jeff Rice always says, it really is this feeling and this sort of sense of justice and humanity and improvement quite often goes with it, as it seems.
Well, we get that window into how societies can and do change, and how if you look after people, that they can bring about that positive change. I remember, I think it was Len Richards always used to say, look to the skilled artisans, that's where change comes from. So maybe that's half brewers these days.
Yes, it's true. A bit more injecting that back in. Oh, it's absolutely fascinating talking to you, Megan. Thank you so much for coming back to History, letting us welcome you back for History Homecoming in the university's 150th year. We're very proud of you. As you can see, we've still got your picture. And I think I've got a few of your two theses behind on my shelf too in the back from the hard copy days. And because you were our colleague as well for a while here too, and definitely an important part of the University of Canterbury, and that is an important part of this province, isn't it? And just sneaking in there on the edge of your electorate, and so you're not far from home, but and still very much a part of the university. But it's really interesting too to get your insights into your career so far, and everything you've done, and all of those skills that you bring to it that was sort of cultivated in these corridors, and all the books and the sources and the parliamentary debates from the fusty dusty to the living live. It's just fantastic. And what do you do to relax? How do you sort of, it must be always with you, your job 24/7?
Yeah, that's where family and friends are so important, and finding a good series on Netflix where you can tune out too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It would be, because it's that part of being the servant of the people, and a representative, very, very much it's, I'm sure, very demanding. So we really appreciate your time of taking time out and to let us honour you and welcome you back, and for you can quite nicely see how all of those skills that you were getting here, and all of the wonderful work that you did has sort of equipped you for your role, and all those experiences, and how science, technology, the arts, the STEAM, it's all connected. we need historians, and the sky's the limit, really. The history degree can take you anywhere you want it to. I think you really prove that. So thank you so much for talking to us, for letting us honour you. and in your life so far, and welcome you back to history and to the university in our 150th year, and we'll look forward to seeing what you get up to next.
Thanks so much, Katie. Great to be back. See
Ka
you.
kite.
Ka kite. Bye.